I'm Mark Bruzonsky. I'm in Washington, and I'm talking with my very close friend, Professor Hisham Ahmed, who normally lives in the U.S., but he's in Bethlehem for the summer. Hello, Hisham.
Hi, Mark. How are you doing?
Okay, we've known each other a long time, and we've been talking about the two-state solution for just about all that time. Here in Washington, some people say it's dead. Some governments seem to think it's alive. The UN is about to discuss these matters. Where are we? Is the two-state solution still something that is viable on the ground with the people who live in Palestine, or should we be looking for something else in view of the realities where you are?
Candidly, from what I see, Mark, the idea of the two-state solution is live in the minds of people who either like to daydream or to fantasize at this very stage. Yes, in the realm of politics, in the world of politics, nothing is ever to be ruled out. Nothing is impossible. Even this idea, which in my view seems to be dead, can be made alive. There's no impossibility. But the facts on the ground that anybody can see, the facts that are created by the occupation authorities, i.e. the construction of an ugly wall, the continuous building of settlements, the non-stop confiscation of Palestinian lands, the abundance of checkpoints, which I call choke points, erected by the Israeli occupation, all of these, in addition to many other measures, Mark, have suffocated the idea of the two-state solution. In other words, there is really no room for the Palestinian state to be built with any contiguity, even out of the West Bank, which, the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem, which represent no more than 22% of historic Palestine. Even out of that, so much has been confiscated and eaten up by the Israeli occupation. I mean, much of the West Bank has been taken for settlement. So where will the Palestinian state be built?
And what about Jerusalem?
Well, the Jerusalem is absolutely surrounded by several belts of settlements, by an amazing, ugly wall, and so many choke points. In addition to that, the occupation has made the lives of Jerusalemites, that is Palestinian Jerusalemites, really impossible. They cannot get any permit to build a house, or even to add a room, or even, in many cases, as I have personally seen, to put a roof on some of their unroofed rooms. Jerusalemites are deprived of so many services. I mean, you go to East Jerusalem, you see the neglect by the Israeli municipality, while if you go to West Jerusalem, you are in an entirely different world. So, candidly, there is no way for a Palestinian state to be effectuated.
Okay.
However,
yes,
out of this despair, out of this absolutely agonizing situation, if there is the political will to make the two-state solution workable, yes, it can be done. And as you very often have said, Mark, that cannot be achieved with walls and barriers. So in other words, this ugly wall will have to be brought down. And to be honest with you, Mark, what I just said notwithstanding, I am utterly convinced that someday this ugly wall will be brought down, and that this ugly wall someday will be turned into a catastrophic, security hazard for the Israelis. Now, in the very, very short term, yes, the Israeli occupation might rejoice that it has prevented Palestinians from crossing, etc., etc., etc. In other words, that it has really created a segregated society, an apartheid society, so to speak. But in the medium run and in the long run, I am absolutely convinced that the will of the people will surpass such barriers and such walls,
well,
because
Hisham,
these walls do suffocate people.
I feel we're in a hospital room with a loved one, and I feel the patient's in a coma. The doctors are not very optimistic, but they're kind of preparing us for the death of the patient. But nevertheless, we're humans. So when we go out in the hall and when we talk to each other, we muster as much possible hope as we emotionally can, even though we're kind of prepared for the patient to die.
This is an excellent analogy. I mean, this is an absolutely expressive analogy. Yes, indeed. The situation is gruesome. The situation is unbearable, is intolerable, it is inhumane. And to be honest with you, the situation is, strategically unfit. I cannot think of any reasonable person who would ever contemplate the idea that the status quo is sustainable.
Well, but
I mean, no matter what decorations, what ornamentations, it cannot be sustained.
Yes, but there's this huge but, and that is that the governments keep talking about the two-state solution as if the realities on the ground you're talking about can somehow be adjusted easily. The Israelis have succeeded with colonizing most of Palestine, leaving pockets of Palestinian population, which are always controlled through these choke points and checkpoints, and then they have a regime called the Palestine Authority, which administers these things, and that itself is now divided into Gaza with Hamas and West Bank with Fatah. This is a tremendous victory, isn't it, for the Israeli colonization project?
Oh, no doubt about it. I mean, I think the Palestinian problem is at its lowest point, based on my own assessment and observations. I mean, I'm absolutely, utterly convinced of that. Yes, this is a crisis situation for the Palestinians, and the Israelis, definitely do have the upper hand. They have achieved most of the objectives they have designated.
And if they can bring about a two-state solution under these circumstances, won't it be closer to autonomy, regardless of how many flags they fly, than to sovereignty? Won't it be they've always called for autonomy ever since '67, and
that's really what it is.
And autonomy under control, autonomy under Israeli hegemony, and under American domination as well. So what is this all about that the PA is going to the UN to call for Palestine membership, which I thought they've actually had a Palestinian state since 1988 when they declared it in Algiers, and more than 100 countries, I think, have relations with the PLO, actually. But it's so complicated, even we experts have to ask each other questions. So what is going on? What's going to happen at the UN? Why is this so important?
Well, absolutely. I mean, autonomy is really what it is, that's for sure. I mean, I think the maximum that the Israelis will settle with is granting an autonomy for Palestinians. And let's also keep in mind that this is exactly what came out in the first Camp David Accords with Egypt. I mean, this is what Palestinians will be assigned an autonomy status. And if we look at the details of the Oslo, Accords, if we really dig into the concepts and into the various vocabulary, what is mentioned there is never a withdrawal of Israeli forces, rather a redeployment. And of course, any power redeploys in a territory under its own tutelage and control. I mean, this is what international law is all about. So sure. And thirdly, if we look at the parameters of what Netanyahu is suggesting, it's definitely the maximum is an autonomy. But you're absolutely right. I mean, the one of the main, let's put it this way. I mean, the Palestinian Authority is, in my view, trying to buy time to fill in a political vacuum or a vacuum of some sort by suggesting going to the United Nations. In my view, this is nothing more just a symbolic measure, assuming that it might succeed. And of course, there are many question marks. The maximum that will be gained out of that is that Palestine will be granted a full membership status at the United Nations, and not just an observer status. A full member status will qualify Palestine to take Israel to the ICJ, to the International Court of Justice, to do everything that all states do. But the world is made up of different factors and different dynamics and different players. And needless to say that I am not entirely sure that the PA will succeed in doing so, that is, in getting a full membership status, because there are certain serious requirements that have to be fulfilled. The American veto is there, and even the United Nations, I mean, General Assembly will...
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, the General Assembly will have to have 2/3 of the members to vote in this regard under the Uniting for Peace resolution, etc., etc. But, I'm not entirely sure that this will change any facts on the ground, quite frankly. And I'm not even sure that the PA will go all the way, for this, for this measure. There are serious problems on the ground. Some of the things that don't get out in the news. I don't know if there is any U.S. newspaper that covered that. For example, on last Wednesday, there was a huge demonstration in Ramallah by the most important sector in Palestinian society, i.e. the doctors. The Doctors' Union, in its entirety, has declared a collective resignation because it was protesting how the Palestinian government, the PA government, was handling services and, payroll, etc. And there were very loud, unequivocal chants against Salam Fayyad, that he is corrupt and that he has ruined, the society and the economy. I'm doubtful that any of this came out, in the press, because it was also almost censored here, were it not for the fact that, for example, AFP, the Agence France Presse, captured the demonstration, the big demonstration by doctors. This is the most important sector in any society, the doctors. And if they collectively resign, you can imagine what happens to medical services. And not only that, the following day, that is Thursday, 2 days ago, there was also a strike by all the employees, all of the Palestinian Authority. It was a half-day strike, signaling perhaps a more extended strike by all the employees of the Palestinian Authority in protest of how Salam Fayyad, who is the beloved Prime Minister of the Palestinian Authority, protesting how he has been handling, the economy, the budget, services, etc. So there are certain dynamics.
He's the American, European, Arab regime agent. He's been put there not by his own people, but by the colonial powers, hasn't he?
Absolutely. This is a guy who represents the smallest bloc party in the parliament, in the Palestinian Legislative Council. You're talking about, I think, a one-man or a two-member party. That's it, and who forms the Palestinian government. It's definitely disgraceful. It's definitely unacceptable by people here, and people are quite aware, quite cognizant of all of that.
As we look ahead, Hisham, I think one can make a counter argument. The Palestinian Authority, in order to keep itself in power, because it's lost almost all credibility and has nothing else to do, and everything that it has claimed it could achieve has not been achieved, other than a little economic prosperity in the little Bantustan of Ramallah. So they'll go to the UN, they'll get another vote. This will be many times in history that the UN has said there should be a Palestinian state, going back to the original partition resolution in 1947. But in a sense, it will legitimize Israeli occupation, because the international community will not do anything. The Americans will be forced, for domestic political reasons, to veto anything serious at the UN. Everything will be watered down and fudged. We're all still debating the word "the" in Resolution 242 from 1967. And it will set the stage for the Israelis to simply continue their colonization, continue their building. Nobody's been able to stop them, even though there have been many international agreements where it was said they were going to freeze their settlements. And one can turn this into an Israeli victory, that nobody's stopping them. And one more time, the UN has voted to give Palestinians rights and statehood. So it seems to me we're on a trajectory where the Israelis have a PR battle to fight, and they've got tremendous weapons to do that. But then the Palestinians continue to be smothered, continue to lose everything, and sooner or later there will be a regional war, and then the Israelis will have plans to reconstruct the population and the territorial situation.
Well, absolutely, Mark. Let's register a precedence here, I think. One thing that I might even want to write about. It is speculative, but it is also analytical and predictive in nature, and that is, you're absolutely right. The Israelis have a PR campaign to deal with in the next few months, and I think they are preparing to deal with that. Even more than that, in a practical sense, in the best of circumstances, that is, in the event the Palestinian Authority succeeds in acquiring this vote by the United Nations General Assembly under the Uniting for Peace resolution, which is absolutely the maximum that they can do. So in the event this takes place, here is, I think, a potential scenario that might unfold. The Israelis, in order to relieve themselves of any legal / political burden, might unilaterally withdraw from some Bandustans, yes, I agree with that term, in the West Bank. They might test one or two first, okay? Exactly on the lines of what they did in the Gaza Strip. They will unilaterally withdraw, and of course they will withdraw from the heavily populated Palestinian areas. That is, they will redeploy, I should say. They will pull out their troops, to the edges, to signal to the international community that they are in compliance with this resolution. But in fact, the Palestinian Authority will rejoice, will consider this to be a victory, but I think it would be the prerequisite exactly for developments identical to those that took place in Gaza. It would be the precursor for another internal Palestinian feud and fighting between the various forces.
Plus,
should the reconciliation between Hamas and Fatah has taken place. But I think, for us, as people have been dealing with this conflict for years, we do know that the underpinnings are still there. There are people on both sides who do not want to see a reconciliation, because there are people on the side who are not necessarily serving Palestinian interests, who are serving other parties' interests, including, and I'm being emphatic and clear, including the Israeli interest, okay? And those people, I think,
you're referring to the PA, aren't you?
To some segments.
Yes.
To some segments. I won't generalize, but definitely to some, to some individuals, to be exact. Yes, to some individuals for sure. Whether knowingly or unknowingly, yes, they are not serving the Palestinian interest in any way. They are absolutely serving the Israeli interest, unfortunately. So, in that event that this scenario might unfold, all right, yes, the Israelis would make it look like as a very positive development. After all, it was Sharon who so-called unilaterally withdrew from Gaza. The Palestinian Authority rejoiced. It considered that to be a victory. But look at what happened in Gaza afterwards. Number one, Gaza was under total siege. Number two, Gaza was turned into the largest prison on earth, and even worse. Number three, Gaza was turned into a fertile ground for internal Palestinian fighting and problems, which has harmed the question of Palestine, the Palestinian problem, even than the occupation itself, for goodness sake.
Yes.
Yes, the picture is gloomy, but if you don't mind, just one last word. The picture is gloomy. The picture is rather complex, and I think the occupation will further have the upper hand. But honestly, I think this is short term. There are other dynamics on the ground, and I think the occupation has often missed seeing such dynamics. It works diligently, it works hard, it works non-stop, but there are times where it misses certain points. And one of the points that it is missing, that the people, any people, will succumb if they so do, but only for a limited period of time. And when I saw this ugly wall and how ugly it was, I am absolutely convinced that someday, not far, I think we will live that, where we will see that wall, that these measures will be turned into the curse upon the occupation.
Well,
the occupation.
I remember, Hisham, after Oslo, how you were one of those, I think you even helped pay for it personally, who organized the taking down of the gates and the walls and the fences around Dheisheh refugee camp where you were born and where you were living. And
that is true.
So I understand your hope that down the road this wall, these barriers will come down. But the current political trajectory we're on is that the Israelis have said all along, we're going to delay things as long as possible. We're going to hold negotiations forever. We're never going to give in. We're always going to pursue only autonomy. And what really, really, really matters is what we do on the ground. How many settlements do we build? How many housing projects do we build? How many roads do we control? How many barriers do we build? They're building these things with permanence in mind. And the trajectory we're on, I see no force that's going to force them to change, and I see tremendous dissension within Israeli society, but the biggest growth in Israeli society has been of the right wing, not the left wing. The left wing's dangerous. I mean, not dangerous. The left wing's desperate, and they're reaching out, and they're creating J Street, and they're signing statements, and they're holding little marches in Tel Aviv, but the left wing has been pushed under pressure smaller, whereas the right wing and the Zionist mainstream have been propelled forward. Now, is that a summary you agree with, or do you see it differently being over there?
No, fully, absolutely, fully. No, you are a very keen reader and observer. I mean, over the minute details, yes, no, you're absolutely correct, Mark. No. See, in the short run, yes, absolutely. There is no power, there is no force that can undo the situation. Yes, and you're right. The Israeli right is growing. You need to see, I mean, how they treat Palestinians at these choke points. At the beginning, I mean, I was really hurt by what I saw. But then I remembered that this is the occupation. And then I started reading what they're doing. I mean, that superiority, false superiority complex. Yes, the right is growing. And the left is shrinking. It's, I should say, not able really to, to effectuate any changes. But, what we saw in the Arab world, whoever thought that this last pharaoh on earth, Mubarak, will be brought down. There are more.
Now wait a minute. He's not the last pharaoh. There's one called.
No, I'm using this.
There are the two. There are the two Abdullahs. And one of the Abdullahs is the big Abdullah, and he is the real pharaoh that would need to be brought down to change the region in truly revolutionary ways. Yeah, that's true. That's absolutely true. Now, what's important here is to I want to see if we both think this is the likely scenario for the future too. What you've outlined about what the Israelis may do, I think, is very prescient. They've pushed and pushed and pushed to get the PA to agree to some kind of Oslo II, some kind of glorified autonomy that the PA could actually call statehood, but wouldn't be. It would, in reality, it would be autonomy on the ground under Israeli control, but it would get the monkey off the Israeli back because the Palestinians would be said to have accepted an agreement and they've got their state. Unable to get that from Arafat, they tried and tried, and he was the one who had the credibility and could have delivered, but they couldn't get him to do it. And at least I believe they eventually assassinated him. I call it a stealth assassination. Then they couldn't get Abbas to do it, partly because he doesn't have the credibility and strength to do it, and partly because he's aware of the trap that's been set for him. On the other hand, he has to cooperate in order to keep getting the money and to keep his regime alive. But when the Israelis can't get that, they could use the historical moment that's coming and do exactly what you say, with one caveat that you didn't fully mention, and that is they will withdraw from the Palestinian population centers, but they will surround them all, just like they've surrounded Gaza. You implied that.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely,
every one of the population centers will be a little autonomous Bantustan, and the UN will consider the people who represent these Bantustans the representatives of Palestine, even though the refugees aren't represented and the population in exile isn't represented at all. The Israelis will simply keep building and building and building. And if you give them another 10 to 20 years, then even the discussion of whether the two-state solution is totally dead or not, in fact, I'm just having kind of an image in my mind. I think the two-state solution should be likened to Ariel Sharon. He's been in his coma for a long time. Yes. He just hasn't physically died. And I think the two-state solution is sort of in a coma with him.
That's absolutely true. No, that's unfortunately, yes. Unfortunately, that's true.
And if he has any conscious power of thought, which he probably doesn't, but I suspect he feels I succeeded. I set out 30, 40 years ago to make sure that Jews would control all of Palestine west of the Jordan River, and I succeeded. Right. I succeeded.
That's definitely true, unfortunately.
And then the last part of that scenario for the future would be that Zionism, at an appropriate historical moment, would turn on the Hashemites of Jordan, which they've been allied with for a long time. And when they can, they would return to the vision that Palestine was divided a long time ago. On the East Bank is Palestine. On the West Bank are the Jews, Israel. And so stop badgering us Israelis about a Palestinian state. It's now where the Hashemite regime is. It's called Jordan. If they want to call it Palestine, good for them.
Oh, no doubt about it. Absolutely. The Jordanian option will be revived. That's for sure.
Well, that's an appropriate moment for us to say what a discussion, what a moment in history, what a time we've come to. We didn't get a chance to talk about the geopolitics of it all, how the Americans are in the middle and don't know quite what to do and are terribly worried about the Arab Spring and terribly worried about what will happen throughout the region and how they will be perceived, and that they have to try very hard not to appear to be totally in Israel's camp, but in reality, of course, they actually are.
That's right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. No, we can definitely deal with that maybe in another session or something. Yeah.
Let's do that. I'm Mark Bruzonsky. I'm in Washington, D.C. Hisham Ahmed is currently in Bethlehem. He was born nearby in the refugee camp called Dheisheh. He teaches political science at St. Mary's College in California. Hisham, thank you so much.
Always great to be with you, Mark.